Hello everyone, my name is Nadia Lee Owens and welcome back to By Black and Bookish, a channel where we're getting a little spooky today. In order to celebrate Halloween fast approaching, I decided to read The Bone Keeper by Luca Veste. I know absolutely nothing about this book or the author. All I know is kind of like a mystery thriller book with some horror elements, perfect for this spooky season. So I'm just going to read the prologue and the first chapter, and if I like it or if I'm asked to very nicely, I'll continue reading it. Okay. The Bone Keeper's coming. The Bone Keeper's real. He doesn't stop. He doesn't feel. He'll snatch you up and make you weep. He'll slice your flesh. Your bones he'll keep before. Her story begins in the tunnel. The soft ground underneath her feet as she walked through, the calm swoosh of air lightly caressing her face, the sounds coming from the darkness, the echoes, rage, the smell of death clawing at her skin. That's what she always remembers, the tunnel. Four of them would walk through it, silent and alone, one after the other. Three would come out. Before the tunnel, it had been a different evening. Crisp autumn air swirled around the group as they walked into the woods. She was 11 years old, following her brother Maddie. He was 3 years older, but not much wiser. Two other kids shuffled alongside them, Lee and Faye, her new stepdad's niece and nephew, around the same age as them. It was nothing more than a game, an adventure of sorts. They weren't supposed to be playing this far away from the house, but it was all fall break and they were kids. They were invincible. Come on, she said, taking the lead and walking with what she wanted to look like confidence. Let's get this over with. She passed the sign that read Dibbinsdale Nature Reserve and the picnic tables on the right and followed the path into the trees. Overhead, it was growing even darker, black clouds gathering. If they had come a week later, it would have been almost night already, but there was still some light left as the evening drew on. It wouldn't last. It's going to rain. Don't worry, Maddie said, catching up to her. We've got the trees, nature's umbrella. She saw the grin appear and then vanish, a last remnant of the preteen boy she used to know. They crossed a wooden bridge, Maddie and Lee throwing small, thick branches into the water as they did so. She paused, watching the water bubble and quiver occasionally. Think there's any fish in there? Nah, Faye said, standing beside her as she rested her hands on the old wood. They wouldn't survive. The bubbles came up and made concentric circles in the water. She stared at it a little longer, squinting as the light continued to fade around them. Then she followed the rest. As their voices continued on the path became a little wider before shortening up again as they followed it around tall reeds and sunk into marshland. It became slushier underfoot as they approached the place they'd gone there to see. She brushed her foot against a single gray feather, slowing her pace. This is the place. A hush fell over them. The wind rippled through the trees, leaves and branches coming to life. The air grew colder as they came to a stop ahead of her. You think it's real? Maddie said, trying to sound jokey and brave. She knew it was an act now, the previous confidence slowly evaporating as reality set in. The Bone Keeper lives here, Lee replied, his whisper almost lost in the movement of the trees above them. People have seen it. She reached the other three standing on another wooden bridge, looking away from her approach. The tunnel came into view as she stopped beside them. Who's going in first? Maddie said, the bravado slipping from his voice now they were there. I reckon it should be Maddie, Lee replied. turning to look at the other teenagers, ladies first. She shivered as a slow breeze came from the trees and the air grew colder still. A few raindrops fell on the water, the pitter and pat breaking into a sudden suffocating silence. Why should it be me? Are you scared? You think I haven't done this before? Yeah, right, Maddie said, a smile creeping across his face. You would never dare to do anything like this. I'll go first. They turned toward Faye, eyebrows raised as the small voice suddenly piping up. If she'd had to bet, she would never have guessed it would have been the little waif of a girl, a year younger than her, who would have volunteered to go through first. In front of them, a short walk from the end of the bridge and a stone path just like all the other paths before, were two tunnels. One half was bricked up, the other was not. It's called Otter's Tunnel, Fake Dad had said to her earlier that day. Used to be water running right through it, and they reckon otters lived there once upon a time. A couple 100 years ago since then, though. Now it's just a few bats and maybe a couple of rats. She shuddered at the thought then and did so again now. Maddie gave her a look, so she rubbed her arms as if she were cold. I'm going through it now, Faye said, beginning to walk away. Can't be bothered standing around just looking at it. She watched as Faye continued to walk toward the path, Maddie and Lee exchanging looks and then shrugging. You're really going to let a 10-year-old girl do it before you? She said, suppressing a giggle. Yeah, you two are hardcore. Maddie and Lee shot her a look, disgust and annoyance. A little fear still there too, just on the edges. They waited for Faye to enter, each taking up a position almost in single file. She would go through the tunnel third, and the other two idiot kids went first. She would have happily done it sooner, given how stupid the entire thing seemed to be. No excited shrieks or howls of fear. It was a little boring, if she was honest. It seemed to be a short walk, given the muted shouts she heard once the others had made it to the other side. Then it was her turn. She stepped toward the tunnel, straining to see the pinpoint of the exit at the end of it. Only dim light was around them as the evening drew in, the darkness beginning to take hold, sunlight disappearing, making the air thin and lifeless. Are you scared? She turned toward Maddie, who was swaying from one foot to the other. No, of course not. Why are you just standing there then? It's your turn. Do you want to go first? Maddie smiled back at her, that sickly one he always used when he had the upper hand, and leave you on the other side alone? Bet you wouldn't like that. Just get going. We'll have to go back soon. She didn't know the time, but she expected it was past that magical time parents had when it suddenly went from being fine to being far too late. She tried to work out how long it would take them to get back from where they were, but couldn't remember the length of the walk now. They would probably have to come back through the tunnel as well. Maybe all together this time, although she expected the boys would take the opportunity to make it appear scarier than it actually was. Come on, are you going to do it or not? Getting bored now. I'm going, she replied, her voice echoing around the silent woods. You're just scared yourself, that's all. Want me to back out so you don't have to do it. That's stupid. I would have been happy to go first if those two hadn't wanted to show off. Yeah, I believe you, honest. What do you think of them? She studied her brother, recognizing the way he had thrust his hands in his pocket and was kicking the ground. This was Maddie wanting to know if things were going to be okay, whether he should be worried about what was to come. He was the older brother, but more and more, it seemed like she was supposed to look after him. I've noticed that with a lot of sibling relationships, when one of them is a boy or girl, you think that the older one would be kind of like the pseudo parent, and that is usually the case. but only with if the eldest is a girl. It doesn't matter if the girl's the younger of the two. I've noticed that in a lot of siblings pairs, it's usually the girl taking care of the brother. Like with Sokka and Katara. Sokka is like what 3-4 years older than Katara, but Katara is always the one who was looking out for Sokka, and even Sokka himself said, "Oh, when I tried to think about what my mom looks like, I've forgotten my actual mom's face and I see Katara." Something I've noticed. I'm not saying that this happens because of sexism, but I'm saying that sexism does have a role in it, because there's just this idea that girls need to mature faster than boys. So I think that contributes to a lot. Not saying it's bad, but I'm just saying maybe we put a lot of pressure on our daughters. "They're annoying brats from the Wirral," she replied, a grin appearing on her face. "They would last 5 seconds on our side of the river, but they're all right, I suppose. Not like we have to spend too much time with them." "I hope Mom isn't thinking of moving over here," Maddie said, still looking toward the ground rather than at her. "Not sure I could deal with that." "We've been through worse." This time, Maddie did look up at her, a pained, scrunched up look on his face as he shook his head. "I don't think so." Then he gave her that smile she always looked forward to. "Come on," he said, taking his hands out of his pockets and pointing toward the tunnel. "Let's get this over with." She turned and began to walk, allowing herself to cross the threshold into the tunnel. At first, there was still some light behind her, so she could see where she was walking. It didn't take long for that to change. The light disappeared, making it difficult to keep her bearings as the darkness within the tunnel took hold. The water beside the path was still, no sounds coming from that direction at all. She concentrated on walking forward, squinting into the distance to focus on where she expected the exit to appear. She was halfway there when the smell hit her. It turned her stomach, making her gag. She stopped walking, bending over with her hand over her mouth. It was a revolting stench, her eyes watering instantly. She shuffled forward, ready to have a go at the 2 little brats who hadn't warned them of it. Then she heard a noise, a shift, nothing more. A small sound that would have been unnoticeable outside. Inside the tunnel, it was as loud as a roar. For a moment, her body betrayed her. She stopped in her tracks, unable to move. Her heartbeat increased tenfold, a churning feeling in the pit of her stomach. The small hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, whipped up by the draft of breeze that came through the tunnel. The sound came again, turned into a whistle, a breathy tune, a tune she recognized. "The bone keeper's coming, the bone keeper's real." "Lee," she whispered, too afraid to raise her voice any louder, "if that's you, I'm going to kill you." The whistling stopped, replaced by another sound. A growl? A laugh? She couldn't tell anymore. This time, her body obeyed her and she found herself able to move. She didn't think twice, breaking into a jog, hoping she was facing the correct direction. She could feel the ground up beneath her grow softer, muddier as she moved along it. She was worried about slipping but couldn't stop herself. If she fell in there, she wouldn't know what to do. She imagined the sound was following her, but she didn't stop, moving in the direction of the pinpoint of light, growing larger. There was something in the tunnel, something watching, lurking in the shadows. She could almost picture whatever it was following her as she broke into a run, could hear it slithering along the path, ready to catch her. She burst out of the tunnel, collapsing to the ground in front of the other 2 children, dropping at their feet. She turned back around, expecting there to be someone emerging, ready to catch her. Now her legs had finally given way. "What's up?" Lee said, grabbing her by the arm. "Got scared, did you?" She couldn't speak, breathing heavily, long gasps of fresh air. Instead, she stared towards the tunnel, unable to see anything within. She wanted to scream Maddie's name, Warn him, tell him what she had heard, seen, felt. She couldn't make a sound, couldn't tell Maddie to stop, that something was in there. Warn him not to go through, warn him that it wasn't safe. She would never see her brother again. That was a pretty good prologue. I'm intrigued. I kind of figured that it was going to be the brother to die right off the bat. Mainly because I'm imagining that the girl, do they even say her name? Oh, I can't find her name. But mainly because I imagine the girl's probably the main character. And it wouldn't have been as emotionally impactful if the step cousins died, because they don't really know them or particularly like them. So, rip to dear old Maddie. Now, it is as if the world shifted in its sleep, and one of its ideas escaped and became real. Steve Mosby, Black Flowers. 1. Louise Henderson was sitting in her car trying to breathe when the call came in. She didn't believe in fate or being able to see the future, yet it was almost as if her body had known what was about to happen, that it was trying to sound a warning to her. Maybe she knew on some level that it was coming, a danger ahead sign which she always seemed to ignore. At that moment, she just wanted to be able to breathe properly, a simple act. Something that goes unnoticed until you suddenly can't do it. Is this what dying feels like? Before her cell phone had cut the radio off mid-song, ringing over the speakers in her car, she had been sitting at the side of the road, parked, the engine idling as she gripped the steering wheel, the sun disappearing behind gray clouds, as if it were playing its own part in her drama. She had been thinking about fire. That was the reason she'd pulled over. When the smell of smoke and ash assailed her, a flash of light, red and orange, then black. Then, in seconds, she was gasping for air. It was as if someone had their hands around her throat, a weight on her chest. Her stomach churned, 1,000 butterflies taking flight inside her. Cars passed by in a blur. A couple people walked on the pavement beside her as she closed her eyes and tried to breathe in and out. Calm. She was safe. Nothing could harm her. Not now. Not now. You're okay. Nothing is wrong. The soothing tone of her inner voice helped a little, but it could barely be heard over the roar of so many other thoughts running through her head. It was getting worse. These moments were becoming frequent, the bouts of terror of not being able to breathe threatening to become the norm. The night before, she had stared at the glow from her cell phone screen while lying in bed, unable to sleep, scrolling through a list of counseling services in the local area, as if she needed it. She didn't, she decided. No one ever did, she thought, lying to herself. It was all a con, a ruse, a way of extracting cash from your wallet, money for nothing. The idea that any of it would make the slightest bit of difference to her life was beyond any logic she could recognize. Yet she was beginning to think it was the only way, the only thing that could help at the moment, telling a stranger your deepest and darkest feelings, bringing out forgotten and suppressed memories. No. She had shut off her phone at that point and stared into the dark and shook her head. It would be a meeting filled with pointless questions, making her examine feelings and all that rubbish. She was better than that. Only it was becoming more difficult to ignore what was happening to her, what had always been there beneath the surface, or that it was getting worse. It wouldn't be long before people at work started to notice, if they hadn't already, of course. She had no idea if people were talking behind her back, if she was the subject of gossip being passed around. She thought Shipley would have told her if that was the case. The sound of the phone ringing still filled the car as her focus came back. Reality began to sharpen, her breathing returning to normal as she pressed on the screen and answered. Wish she checked who was calling before she keyed the button. Hello? It's me, said the voice on the other end of the phone. Are you on your way down? Louise bit down on her bottom lip before responding to the detective sergeant. On my way where? She replied, catching a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror as she checked behind her and pulled back into a gap in the traffic. No one else has been in touch yet? Bloody hell. What's going on? Louise said, cutting off the beginnings of what sounded like an oncoming rant. A woman found wandering the streets in Melling. She's been assaulted and paramedics are working on her now. Doesn't look good. You need to get yourself down here. What's the address? Detective Paul Shipley reeled off the road name. How long would you be? Louise looked around her, the unfamiliar street not exactly helping. She tried to remember where she'd been heading before she'd pulled over, but was struggling. I'm on my way, sir, Louise said, and ended the call. She continued to drive in as straight line as she could, hoping to find a familiar landmark or road sign. Eventually, she gave up and pulled over again, pressed the address into her GPS, and got back on the road. The radio had kicked back into life, some mindless, soulless track playing. She ignored it, concentrating on what was in front of her. Anxiety was quickly being replaced with anger, the two emotions more interchangeable than ever, it seemed. She hoped the person who had attacked a woman on the street was still around when she got there. That would be helpful. Another 20 minutes and she was arriving at the scene. All previous thoughts disappeared from her mind, professional mode kicking in. She boxed off her personal feelings and focused on what lay ahead. The crowded streets, the multiple vehicles, police markings stark in her own show. Her job. A residential area with a few shops scattered here and there. The old corner shop, now a chain convenience store. Post office next door, old style crosswalk, globular lamppost on either side. Whitaker Lane, which Louise enjoyed whispering to herself as she sat in the car. Whitaker. I think it's pronounced Whitaker. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm probably going to pronounce every location wrong. I'm not good with words, so sorry in advance. She left the car parked on a side street, half on the road, half on the pavement. She could already hear someone standing outside their house grumbling at her arrival as she made her way toward where the main hive of activity seemed to be concentrated. She pulled her coat tighter around her body as the wind picked up and swirled around her. D.C. Louise Henderson, Louise said to the uniform closest to the crime scene tape, still being strung up. She held up her ID when she gave her a withering look. Victim still on the scene? The uniform gave her a nod, then looked toward the ambulance parked nearby. They usually take people in her state with them when they go back to the hospital. Louise stopped herself replying with a similarly sarcastic remark and instead made her way toward the figure standing a few yards away, ending the power trip the uniform was displaying for no one's benefit but his own. Sarge? Louise, finally, D.S. Shipley replied, glancing in her direction and then back toward the paramedics. She could now see more clearly. Start taking statements from the closest witness. I don't trust these uniforms to catch everything. And get that lot over there to stop bloody filming everything we're doing. Louise looked across the road to where a group of people had gathered. A few had cell phones raised up, pointed in her direction. She instinctively raised a hand in front of her face, but dropped it before, she hoped, Shipley noticed. What have we got here? Louise said, trying to work out what exactly was being asked of her. Just so I know what to ask. Shipley breathed heavily through his nostrils and placed his hands on his hips before crossing his muscular arms over his chest, all in one supple movement. He was taller than Louise, him being just over 6 feet, her in the mid-5 range. But he didn't loom over her as other superiors had in the past. He was lean and simply unthreatening. Young woman found walking up this road. She's in a bad state. Paramedics were on the scene first. Looks like she collapsed right around here. Someone had done a nasty job on her, beaten and stabbed by the looks of it. There's a trail of blood up the road. They're trying to stabilize her now. Louise scanned the surroundings, trying to spot anything out of the ordinary, but it couldn't have looked more usual if it had tried. A normal road lined with houses, white double-glazed bay windows at the bottom, a double pane above them, red bricks, and a patch of grass in front of most of them. It would be idyllic at another time, but now the police vans and cars, an ambulance, and a bunch of onlookers spoiled the quiet. What's her name? No idea, Shipley said, uncrossing his arms. He ran a hand through his hair, musing it up a little, the side part not suddenly quite right. She didn't get to the point of introducing herself to us. Another sarcastic remark, Louise thought, but she didn't show any reaction. This was how it always was. Everyone hid their true feelings from each other. As coppers, detectives, they were better than most at doing that. Without saying another word, she left him to it, walking toward the group on the other side of the road. Not before she took a short detour past the paramedics working on the woman. She couldn't see much, but enough to know it was bad. Ripped clothes, torn, almost shredded, blood on the ground or beneath her, but not enough to pull, just spots, patches. Her eyes were closed, but she could see the rise and fall of her chest, which seemed non-erratic. The paramedics kneeling beside her worked in silence. The occasional murmur of support almost whispered into the woman's ear. Louise looked away, scanning around her, looking for something, anything that might give her a clue how the woman had ended up there. She had a vague sense of the area, but wasn't as familiar with it as she wished she were. She stared up at the road, imagining the woman's journey to the place where she collapsed. Ahead, she could see patches stretching into the distance, the look of the road not changing dramatically. Behind those, she could see green fields, trees, woods, she thought. She would have come from the woods. So that's the end of the prologue in the first chapter of The Bone Keeper by Luca Veste. I think I might continue reading this on my own because I am very much interested in it. The prologue reminded me a lot of Stephen King's It, even though I personally never read the book or watched the movie. I just know it's about kids. So every time I think of kids in a kind of a horror setting, I immediately think about It. But then in the first chapter, once I realized it was kind of like a detective, it's more detective mystery than really horror, at least so far. It made me start thinking of what is that like the PlayStation 3 game made by David Cage, Heavy Rain. It made me think a lot of Heavy Rain. And if you know me, you know I love hating on David Cage games. It's my favorite pastime. And Heavy Rain is my personal favorite out of all of them, mainly because it's a slightly better story than any of the others. And yes, I am including Detroit Become Human. I especially hate that one. But Heavy Rain has a slightly better story, but it's still kind of ridiculous. And just the whole detective trying to suppress a childhood trauma, because I'm pretty sure Louise is the girl from the prologue. And I'm also guessing that Louise is probably not her real name, which is why in the prologue it never does mention her name. She probably changed it in order to like kind of go incognito. So yeah, I'm excited to find out who's the bone keeper, what actually happened to her brother, and all that. So, like I said, if you ask me nicely, I'll do another video where I read another 2 chapters. Other than that, if you want to talk to me or have any comments, make sure to comment below or message me on Twitter or Instagram at Lee Owens. That's it. Happy Halloween. Bye.